answer to why do I believe in God is related to a fact-finding mission that I went on after the birth of my children. I was born and raised in the church, considered myself a Christian most of my life, but honestly had never really done the deep dive or research into what that actually even meant. I didn't know how to answer basic questions about my faith when atheists or agnostics would ask me. Didn't know how to answer that. And so I realized that if I was going to have children and raise them, and I would be taking them to church just the same way that I was raised, I would need to know exactly what it was that I believed. And I was going to have to be certain that I believed what I said I believed. Otherwise, why am I teaching my kids? Because eventually they're going to have questions as well. And if God isn't real, why am I bothering at all? So I basically started in the same way that a man by the name of Lee Strobel started. He has a book that later became a movie by the same name called The Case for Christ, where he started as an atheist and went on a fact-finding mission looking at scripture, the authenticity of it. And that's sort of the approach that I took. I said, you know what, I'm gonna look at scripture and I'm gonna critique it. I started with a look at evolution versus creation. And what I discovered is the further I went along, the more shaky the foundation for evolution's claims. You know, they weren't as concrete as what most people would lead you to believe. And I realized that there is just as much credibility to the creation story as there is for evolution. So that was kind of comforting. I was finding some answers here and there. Then you start looking at a lot of the deeper science and things like that with regards to the inner workings of all of the biological creatures here on Earth, you know, humans, animals, and you start to realize that there isn't just one big bang that has to happen. There's not just one miracle, so to speak, that has to take place for life on Earth to have happened the way that scientists claim that it does or did. It would have had to be multiple thousands, hundreds of thousands of different miracles. Some of them, depending on which process within the body you're talking about, would have had to happen simultaneously within one instance for that creature to have developed the way that it did. So that increased my faith as well, realizing that, again, some of what creation teaches was a little bit more reliable than what science had explained. So, because there's many different religions in the world too. So I started looking deeper into what it was that I believed. I looked for skeptics' claims of contradictions in the Bible, and I started researching them. I was able to find out that it was either one, a complete misinterpretation or misrepresentation by the atheist or agnostic community on what that scripture was teaching or talking about, or I was able to determine that there isn't necessarily a contradiction, it's just a difference in who wrote that particular passage versus another of the Gospels, for instance. So I came to realize that there is a lot of scripture that isn't contradicting itself, it's just misunderstood. Then I started looking also at the Bible itself as far as, you know, hey, we have this man-made book, right? I come to find out it's not just a man-made book. It's actually a compilation of historical documents. And the further I went down that rabbit hole, the more my faith was increased as I realized that what we're looking at, we have this privilege of looking into these letters being sent by these historical figures. Once I started realizing what the Bible actually was, then you start to have a whole bunch of other confirmations that this is legitimate. For instance, every single one of the apostles was martyred or died in jail or alone, not once recanting their faith. Now, if this was completely made up, why do that? If they hadn't actually seen what they saw, why? So the big why question that follows a lot of these accounts is in itself evidence for the existence of God, and by extension Christ being who he said he was. And then lastly, it's just simply the application that I've seen in my own life. Once I repented, turned back from my sin, and gave my life to Christ and realized that the next step then is to acknowledge Him as Lord and now follow. There was the undeniable reality that my relationships with my wife, my children, the decisions I was making were infinitely better than the ones I was making on my own. But that is also a huge factor in why I believe there is a God, and that God is the God of the Bible.